I don't know if I have enough voice to do Rappin' Walt, but I think I should try. It's called Rappin' Walt. It's old school. It's real old school. It's like Run DMC. You can tell by the vote, no sucker MC. We don't say that anymore, but this is old school. It was written a long time ago, so just pretend it just came on the radio, and you know it's an oldie station. Apparently, there's a pun in the last line. I didn't know it, and somebody pointed it out to me. Rappin' Walt. This is Walt Whitman, of course. I started from fish-shaped Palma knock. I went from Staten to Manhattan and I made you rock. I'm the man, I'm the poet, no sucker MC. Truth and beauty came naturally. I listened to the mocker and the mountain hawk. Now I rhyme every time I talk. I sing of this life and the life beyond. I'm like Hank T from Walden Pond. Melville, Emerson, Hawthorne, Poe, those sucker MCs can't touch my show. I rock 'em in the East. Imagine a big beard. I rock 'em in the East, I rock 'em in the West. I rock 'em like a he-bird on his nest. I rhyme about Pittsburgh, New Orleans, about Baltimore and Abilene. I rhyme about cities and the folks inside 'em. I rhyme and I rhyme ad infinitum. Page 2. I sing the rivers and I sing the trees. I sing about the critics, but they're down on me. But all their bugging don't worry me, 'cause I'll be fresh in the 21st century. Melville, Emerson, Hawthorne, Poe, those sucker MCs can't touch my show. I rock 'em in the East, I rock 'em in the West. I rock 'em like a he-bird on his nest. I drive folks crazy with my vulgar rhymes. They burn my books 'cause I'm ahead of my time. The people cover their ears. They squirm and blush, and when I open my mouth, I gush, gush, gush. To the bearded toughs, I yawp my tunes. I like nothing better than to dress their wounds. Yo, America, you've got nothing to fear. Though your ship's not in, your Brooklyn Ferry's here. All right. So, this is a news article you might have missed. Crowd at W.S. Merwin poetry reading sets record for hymns. Lensic crowd hymns after all but one poem. Santa Fe. The audience at Wednesday's sold-out W.S. Merwin reading at the Lensic Theater set a new world record for hymns, breaking the previous mark set at a Merwin reading at the Napa Valley Writers Conference in 2004. Merwin, known for his short, Zen-influenced, enigmatic poems, has broken his own humming record 56 times, dating back to a landmark 1992 College of Santa Fe reading. Aware that a record-breaking performance was in the offing, Carl Johnson, a veteran hummer, traveled from San Francisco to witness the feat. I knew we were in for a good night. A beaming Johnson offered when the audience hummed after Robert Hass's rather faltering reading of a Merwin poem during the introduction. That just never happens. There were several nerve-wracking minutes of delayed humming during the first few poems that Merwin read, but by mid-reading, the hymns were blossoming spontaneously in every corner of the old theater. A sweat-drenched Merwin, recovering from the record-setting performance backstage, smiled broadly and flung his fist in the air when Hass arrived to pound fists and chest thump the elder poet. It was a freaking hymn fest out there, Merwin said. I had that humming out of my hand. An apologetic Lydia Johnson, a staffer at the Lensic, was among the first audience members to congratulate Merwin. That was wonderful, she said in a tiny voice. After attempting to clear her throat, she continued, I'm sorry, I'm hoarse from humming. By the end of the evening, the sold-out theater audience had hummed audibly after all but one very short poem. Audience member John Davis, interviewed after the show, was distraught. I would have hummed after that one too, he said. It was just so short that I didn't realize it was over. By the time I was ready to Merwin was already on to another poem. It was an infinitely hummable poem. It was just a timing thing. I could kick myself. Thank you. People rarely at my readings. This is a true story. A friend of mine did a album down. He recorded an album Nobody believes it when I say it's a true story, huh? This is a true story. My friend did this album down in the Delta in Mississippi, and he hired these local musicians, and his drummer basically said something like this. And it's called On Drums, the great Otis Fogg. We're doing great work here, he says. You want that kick on the intro, he says? I can do that kick on the intro, he says. Then the snare run to the splash, he says. Set it up nice for that vocal, he says. Shine a spot right on that vocal, he says. That's a great vocal, he says. Sounds like collards and beans, he says. You got that right, he says. Sounds like okra hitting the skillet, he says. Here to the Delta and back, he says. You keep doing that, he says. I'll bring the backbeat, he says. I'll dig a hole to plant it in, he says. Gonna be big, he says. Big old cypress moss hanging down, he says. That big, he says. I'm seeing us on the Tonight Show, he says. Letterman, he says. Oprah, he says. And that lesbian chick, he says. What's her name, he says. I'm seeing big things, he says. The dancer, he says. Really big, he says. Bigger than Dave Matthews, he says. I played with Matthews, he said. Did I tell you that? Tour of England, he says. France, he says. Guy could sing, he says. But you got the soul, he says. You got the swamp, he says. Just bubbles up out of you, he says. Man, he says. Like nothing I ever heard, he says. Monday, he says. Might not make it, he says. Getting evicted, he says. Did I tell you, he says. $400, he says. By the weekend, he says. How you fixed? All right. Yeah. All right, this is the last poem. Two more. No, last poem. I swear. And this is a modern day retelling of the Odyssey. Did you know that bison hide was indispensable to many Native Americans? You know, dinosaurs wouldn't be nearly as popular if they were still around. I don't know why I thought of that, but it popped into my head. Okay, last poem. I'm dragging it out, aren't I? Oh, I know, yeah. So it's called Men's Work, and, you know, again, I'm an expert on failed relationships, and so I understand it. Men do work, but it's very important not to do all of it, because as soon as everything's fixed, she's going to kick you out. So, I mean, so, people say, Chuck, what do you know about work? And I say, I know about work the way a cat knows about dogs. Men's Work, last poem. Letting the dog out, letting the dog in, feeding the dog, scooping the poops, Googling things, checking the furnace, stopping the drip, watering the garden, snapping the photo, scolding the kids, setting the alarm, spoiling the ending, saving the doc, recovering the doc, printing the doc, broiling the steak, spraying the bugs, logging the groceries, knowing the teams, finding the dog, missing the point, knowing the time, tuning the guitar, hanging the picture, making the sandwich, spoiling the kids, pronouncing the wine, making the hot water hotter, tossing the frisbee, loading the trunk, adding the numbers, telling it straight, buying the book, testing the water, making the coffee, gassing the car, lifting the weights, avoiding the issue, pronouncing the scotch, watching the game, getting cheap flights, going out in the cold, carving the meat, knowing the date, starting the car, saving receipts, improving the reception, filling the drinks, cashing the checks, lifting the sofa, dropping the kids, deleting the messages, changing the oil, remembering the number, finding the remote, checking the temperature outside. Showing up late, fixing the squeak, calling the plumber, changing the bulb, doing the taxes, telling the jokes, starting the fire, throwing the ball, talking to salesmen, bashing the prez, getting up early, staying up late, making the mess, finding the watch, singing along, paying the bills, eating the leftovers, picking the tunes, getting the mail, setting the buttons, losing the tools, emptying trash, tracking the mud in, naming the bird, changing the tire, watching the news, kissing the wife, finding out where the hell that knocking sound is coming from. Thank you. All right. I've made a mess up here.
Oh, excuse me, sir.
Hey, wait a second. I didn't do it. It was Angelo. Thank you. Anybody have any questions?